north on the road.
No, not at all.
I
46
came
degrees of
bombing
warm.
out and said, oh, it's wonderful. And my car's covered in ice.
Well, 46 degrees at my house.
It was only 29 coming down. from
Yeah. It was colder here. You're getting the warmth is coming from the
Yeah.
west.
It's always
Buffalo
warm. It's
is
always
sending you
warmer
warm.
in Franklin County.
It's always warm.
So we're live.
That is not good. It's not good to be warm.
And we have Damien, and he has one or two sections.
Two
There-
sections and a question about a third.
Okay, right. So we should, and I'm really hoping we can get all of this done in 25 minutes, so I'll have to be diligent. So which page should we start? Do you know?
Yep, so
24?
if you look at the bill 28, section 23.
So
Oh,
we're at-
page 28, okay.
on draft 7.2.
ADU jurisdiction.
28. All right, I can get
Right.
rid of this.
So
Page 20.
8.
So I think it's worth starting. So on page 28, what we have is the language that was in the bill as introduced.
Mm-hmm.
And so this would have added language, if you go down to line 18, that says an accessory dwelling unit as permitted under 24 VSA 44.12.1E. So it would have included accessory dwelling units
Mm-hmm.
within the definition of public building. The thing is, what you can't see there is under the existing law, the existing definition of public building means includes a building in which people rent accommodations, whether overnight or for a longer term. And
Right.
that's very important because
Yes.
it includes rental units.
It calls all rental units and all short-term
So
rentals.
we had Mike DeRocher in who gave us a language change. Did that make it to
It
you?
did. So that
Okay.
is on, so that was the context for Mike's change, which
Yeah.
starts on the bottom of page 29.
Brilliant.
It's,
That was very good.
So, sorry, the language on page 28 that you referred to includes all rental units, anything that's rented overnight.
it's already included, and then we're adding ADUs to that, but since ADUs are typically rented, because they're an accessory to the main
Right.
dwelling unit, they would technically already be included under the law.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike's language, which starts on line 16 on page 29, but the real part of it is on page 30,
Mm-hmm.
would provide that
A carve out.
it clarifies. So if you
Yeah.
go down to lines 8 to
Right.
15, it provides that public building does not include an owner occupied single family residence unless used for a purpose described in subsection A. So that means if you have
It's another
a
reason to
single
keep it.
family residence where you're renting out the rooms, or you're using it as a business, et cetera, you can fall under the public building definition. And then number 4 is where Mike suggested changes, and that would provide that an owner occupied single family residence with an accessory dwelling unit permitted under 24 VSA 44.12.1E unless used for the purpose described in subdivision 1D. So what that basically means is that if you have an ADU and it's an in-law apartment for your parent and you're not renting it, not a public building, but if you're renting it out, whether to a family member or someone else, then you fall under the public building. And so that, I think, is the clarification there, that if you're using it as a rental property, whether short-term or long-term, public building, but if you're just using it for your family.
And not collecting rent.
Right, and this is essentially a clarification of the existing law.
Right.
But I don't know that it's a significant change from the underlying bill language, because I think as I read the existing law, an accessory dwelling unit, to the extent it's used as a rental property, it's already a public building. and
Mhm.
subject
It's
to
just
those
people
requirements.
maybe have not developed it with that focus.
I think people are not aware of that,
Right.
because they look at, rental accommodations and they say, oh, hotel, something like that. So the other piece here, building in which people rent accommodations, that's language we've traditionally used to
Yeah.
include both hotels and apartments.
And can you remind us, or do we just need to get clarification from Mike? Because I always need to be reminded what this triggers in terms of what it's required as it's developed. So it's, as you're developing this unit, you need to include, so does it,
Life safety.
it includes the window specifications, obviously the, all the right,
Smoke, CO2,
and
window.
CO2 and sprinklers.
No,
No,
we had
no.
this conversation.
Yeah, we did with Mike, but I
So-
can't remember.
Yeah.
It's that,
That's with,
no, I don't think so. It's like 2 or 3
So
units.
it triggers
trigger.
the fire and life safety codes. I think, and I would defer to Mike on
Yeah,
this,
I just
but
can't.
think the sprinklers are not required
Yeah.
all the time. It depends on the building.
right, exactly.
And
I'm gonna ask him. I'll
so I
email
think
Mike.
it may be 4 units and
That's
above,
right now.
If
but
someone has that list, it's great,
yeah,
it's great, but we have.
but yeah, it triggers the public building requirements. But
Yeah.
it's important to remember that the public building requirements are not a monolith.
Right,
They have different specifications depending on size and use.
Yeah, that, right, exactly, which
It's not a one size fits all fire code.
right.
But it does trigger compliance with the fire code beyond the basic sort of residential building code. To the extent that there are differences.
Can you, when we go to the Human Rights Commission section, can you also tell me what the last section is? Just, I want to mentally keep enough time to,
Yeah.
and we don't have to leave this yet. I just
Okay.
want to mentally, can you tell me what the third section is?
It's gonna be section 26, which is the criminal penalty section.
Okay,
Just a question about whether with the other changes, you still want the criminal penalty change
right,
in
okay,
there.
great. So then we
Yeah.
can, go ahead, Senator Harris.
Yeah, I just have a small suggestion, which is the language itself,
Mhm.
in paragraph 4, because there's obviously a lot of
Which
other.
is paragraph where we.
I'm sorry,
like
that we're just
subsection
on the owner occupied single family residence accessory dwelling unit,
Oh, okay.
that has now a specific exception for building, or I should say ADUs that are rented.
Mhm.
It was easy for me to know what subdivision 1DA was because it's on the same page. I expect it won't be easy for others who are looking at the
Would you like
code.
a parenthetical?
Well, what I would like, but I don't know if this is possible, is to just say unless the unit is rented. And you can copy the language, whether overnight or for longer term, but I just think it would have more clarity. It would mean that if you update the section, you'll have to update both of them.
You'd probably still have to say unless rented as described in subdivision. I mean, the thing is, we usually try to be really precise.
Oh, that's
But I
fine.
think,
Yeah,
But I
but
think having
yeah,
the
the
word
plain
rented would
language.
be really helpful and provide clarity to folks.
yeah, I think what I could do is instead of saying unless used for, I could say unless rented. And I think the way it's unless
As
rented for either overnight or a longer term as described in subdivision.
I think that would be really
Okay.
helpful because then that would, people would understand that it's the Airbnbs as well as longer term rentals. And SROs would be part of this too, if they're rented.
SRO.
The single room occupancy.
Thank you. Sorry, I haven't been in the committee with you.
you're
But
gonna
so
have to be the
anything
flavor.
that's rented as a
Yeah,
place.
if you're
say whether-
renting it,
Okay.
yeah, whether it's a single room, whether it's an efficiency, a studio, or even a full apartment, like an Airbnb style where you might have 2 bedrooms.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah, it's all gonna fall under that rented dwelling
that's
or
great.
rented accommodation. Yeah, so.
I was on
what else?
green light, so as far as I know.
Okay, so is everyone good now with that section?
So I'm just emailing Mike to ask him for a list of
Right.
what's included.
I know it
It'd probably
includes
be
railings.
complicated. Yeah, I mean.
But
it
it's
depends.
it's not necessarily sprinklers unless, it may even be a height, like a.
Yes,
four
yeah, well, let's
story
not
thing,
go down.
but-
that
Yeah,
road right
there-
now. Yeah.
There are multiple things, shared
Right,
roofs
right.
and other things, because you're concerned about the spread of fire within a structure.
Right,
Mhm.
And you're concerned about people who may not be in the unit where the fire starts, not knowing.
right,
And when the sprinklers go, you know.
yeah.
So, and it also gives you more time if the fire is spreading within the walls or something like that, which
Section.
hopefully they have good fire
Yeah.
blocking.
Great.
So, sorry, I
okay.
digress.
We all
Um,
can like go deep into the rabbit hole if we need to.
So, section 24 this is much simpler. So what we've done is taken out sections 24 and 25, which added concurrent jurisdiction for the AG and the state's attorneys to enforce fair housing laws. And instead, the Human Rights Commission has asked for an additional litigator so that they're not being stretched so thin between their educational mission, their internal investigations, which frequently just end in a mediated agreement between the parties, and then the instances where they do have to litigate. And so this would provide for one new full-time exempt litigator position in the Human Rights Commission.
Right.
And it includes $120,000 appropriation from the general fund for personal services. So that's salary and benefits.
Senator Clarkson.
120,000 is totally not enough for a litigator.
So
I can't remember, is that what she asked for? But it's just unrealistic.
that is the number that I put in. So you should check on budgeting on that number. So 120,000 would get you
Somebody fresh out of law school, maybe.
or with a few years experience, but you're
Yeah,
not
but
going to
very
get someone
modest.
with 8 to 10 years experience for
Yeah.
that.
But we should just double check that figure.
Yeah, I think Boris may be back from vacation, which was a.
Right,
helpful
so we
thing to-
put in placeholder number
Right,
here.
okay, as long as it's a placeholder, fine.
so-
This is the housing bill. Should there be any specificity as to why we're
Board's
we're putting a litigator in?
reaction to.
Um,
What the litigator is to do or what?
So the litigator will litigate both fair housing and public accommodations under this, because that's their jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction doesn't extend beyond that for a litigator?
Their jurisdiction extends beyond that to the extent that it's a state agency. They cover employment discrimination within state agencies. So basically, laws where the Attorney General would enforce the anti-discrimination provision when it applies to a state agency, the Human Rights Commission takes over as the prosecuting authority, because the Attorney General is the defense attorney for the state as well. So the litigator would cover probably the full breadth there. My understanding, and now that Laura's back from vacation, you should hear from her, but my understanding is that because of the way it is currently over there, it falls to Bor, one of the investigators who already have a full workload. If the case goes to litigation, they basically have to litigate on top of their workload. So either cases get delayed or the litigation isn't done well. And so the idea is to relieve the workload across the board. But we certainly could add language specifying the use or the intent. My understanding with this language is it would allow them to use the litigator across their jurisdiction rather than restricting it to just housing. So it's.
I'm just a little uncomfortable about putting something in that has a much broader breadth to what we are authorizing than what our intent is. Our intent, if we're adding something here, is to support the housing issues generally, and litigation with respect to housing and need some specifics associated with that.
What if we
wonder
said
we
like
create something that,
predominantly housing?
as I said, I'd just like to, if we think of some language that could add some specificity as to what the intent is for adding this position, I think would be helpful.
Litigator position with expertise in fair housing or.
I think it might be worth
getting bored.
getting bored.
Yeah, because it's
Input
to alleviate
and
bore,
Yeah,
to relieve bore.
give me some better ideas about how to
right.
phrase it and do it within these constraints.
Yeah, as I said, I'm just concerned that we're creating something that could
Right.
be used for an entirely
Yes.
different purpose than what this bill is.
Do you, quickly on this, do you mind, Randy, if Senator Brock, if we take that offline with, like, do an email exchange
That's
to
fine.
get Damien language and then
That's
come
fine.
back with it?
That's
Okay,
fine.
it just, we don't have time to get.
Provided we
into it.
agree with what comes back.
That's fair, yeah,
Right.
just without the witness trip piece. Senator
No,
Brock.
that's fine.
No, I was just saying she needs help, period, but the predominantly.
Yeah, we'll try to take that at 10.
Okay. So the section 25 is reserved.
Because
Just
it
in
had
case,
another.
yeah. So I've left it in there just in case. You can always take it out and just
Right,
when this bill moves. So section 26 is the criminal penalty. The original bill proposed an increase in the criminal penalty for a violation of the Public Accommodations and Fair Housing Act from $1,000 to $10,000. The
Up to.
question,
but it's up to, I just.
yeah, up to,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah, it's not a
Right,
mandatory
Yeah, yeah.
penalty, it's a not more than. I don't know the extent to which the criminal penalty is ever actually
right,
sought.
right.
And my big question for the committee was I had direction on all the other sections.
Yeah, that's fair.
Did you want any changes to this section or did you want to leave it? I can't tell you the
The
policy
intent.
arguments,
Yeah.
around keeping it or not.
Senator Clarkson.
So, and I'm just curious, when it's just a fine, is that a criminal penalty or just a penalty? Because it's not a criminal, I mean, it's a crime, but it's a civil penalty, it's not.
So it's listed as a criminal penalty. And
Is it the only penalty? Like, there's
No,
no
there-
jail time or something?
no, there's no jail time provided in the law. If we go to the rest of it, there are other penalties that the commission can seek.
Mhm.
So I don't know the extent to which this is ever used because it would be, this would be, my guess is probably for egregious
Right.
repeat offenders.
Yeah,
Because there we go, there's the commission statute. So the Human Rights Commission already has the power under 4553 or 4554 to enforce conciliation agreements, impose a civil penalty of not more than $10,000, seek compensatory and punitive damages on behalf of an individual who was harmed, seek costs and reasonable attorney's fees. So it's essentially the same basic set of powers we give to the AG's office for consumer protection and discrimination enforcement over there.
if you add this 10,000, it aligns more with.
So yeah, the criminal penalty is in addition to that.
So that's.
Does it say
abnormal.
criminal penalty when you deal with what the AG can do in consumer fraud cases
Right,
or consumer issues?
I would have to look. So
I mean, it just strikes me, it's hard for me to imagine that Human Rights Commission has the ability to assess criminal penalties. And is
No,
it
I think at
felony?
that
Is it a
point-
misdemeanor? What is?
I think at that point, they would likely need to refer it to a state's attorney to seek the
Okay.
I would
criminal
think so.
penalty anyway.
Well,
But again, this is an area where,
but is
she's
this criminal
litigating it,
penalty-
she's in court.
If it already exists, where does it exist? Does it exist in the AG, like outside of both the Human Rights Commission and the AG's office?
so the criminal penalty was added in 1987,
Okay,
which is as part of the original Fair Housing and Public Accommodations Act.
okay,
I don't know what the intent was for enforcement of it. I can do more research and get back to you, but I'm not
Okay.
aware of it being used. Again, Bohr would probably be
okay,
better expert, so I can also, when I reach out to her about the language,
Great.
just check with her about whether they use the penalty and
Yeah.
whether that increase is necessary.
So we have a
or-
question mark here and we'll try to
Yeah.
solve it. by-
Because it was increased in the original bill, but I think the idea there was that if you're bringing in the state's attorneys, having a little bit bigger
Right.
Mhm.
penalty
Having
for
more
them
teeth.
to wield
Right.
makes it more, provides for better deterrence when the state's attorney can say, I'm gonna seek a
Mhm.
$10,000 penalty for this violation
Mhm.
versus currently where the Human Rights Commission can already seek that as a civil penalty,
Right.
not a
Right.
criminal penalty.
Is
So
it-
it seems,
Was the civil 10,000 or 10,000 per violation?
they can seek a civil penalty of up to 10,000 per violation, I think. Let me just double check.
That's got even more teeth.
Right.
So there. I grabbed the wrong section. So they can 10,000 for each violation of law, including violations of a temporary restraining order issued pursuant to their enforcement section. So when they go to court, they can get a temporary restraining order. If you violate that, they can seek a $10,000 penalty. They can also seek $10,000 penalties for violations
Okay.
of the law outside of that restraining order. So they've got the civil authority to go after this. I'm not sure when they would seek the criminal authority, but again, we could ask them if that's even something that makes sense.
I guess the
Yeah.
safe thing to do would be to ask. Otherwise, we could let this. be
Yeah,
solved.
it's a 35-year-old statute.
Right.
It needs an update.
And at a minimum, the deterrent power of $1,000 is a lot
Yes.
different today than it was in
That is
1987.
fair.
But if
87
it's
had the,
not being used,
but 87 had the $10,000 amount in it as well, right?
so,
So just think what that would be in today's money.
well, so that section was added, it doesn't tell me what year, but it's been amended in 1989, 1995, 2005, and 2015.
So maybe
So I don't know when the last time the penalty was amended, but it's been amended since it was added,
The civil one.
the civil one.
And so clearly people looked at that more as.
So it's been looked at over and over
Yeah,
again.
that's what this one, but they can
Yeah,
be aligned. Yeah.
so, but yeah, I'll ask for,
Okay.
and then I can either forward her answer, ask her just to reply to the committee,
Mhm.
reply all to the committee with suggested language changes and the any comments on the penalty, and then it can be posted to the committee's website.
Okay.
If you don't have time to get in a witness. So,
Okay.
great. Other questions for me this morning? I'm gonna get out 3 minutes ahead.
I know, I'm so
Madam
proud of
Chair.
us. I'm really proud of us.
I'll use it to walk to my next committee where I'm scheduled in 3 minutes.
We do have.
I'm literally booked every minute of the day today, so.
That's awful.
Okay, Boar has something that, it might not be on this section, it would be on the 24 on the 120,000 and the position. She's,
Oh, is she watching? Or,
we emailed her and
Oh.
she asked for 150,000.
okay,
So let's. And she didn't, I don't think she knew the piece about we emailed her to start a conversation before we got the second part in.
I think I have some breaks in my day tomorrow, so I'll try to talk to her.
About those two pieces, the
Yeah.
specificity and the penalty.
And the
Yeah,
penalty.
I'll either try to email her if I get a minute today, or
I can
set up a
check
phone
that.
call
I'll
tomorrow.
just.
Great.
Perfect.
That was instant response.
Right, I know, or it's good, so she must be back from vacation, I hope we didn't interrupt anything.
I hope so, yeah, she's not watching as well.
Exactly, so we're changing this to 150.
Yeah,
Yep.
well, if we all agree, but I would encourage.
Sounds like we are.
We will not get any.
Right.
We know what it's for.
Yeah.
We're doing it at 150 or we're not doing it.
Great.
All right, great.
Moving
Thank you.
along.
Thank you, thanks, Daniel.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
We appreciate your time. I'm gonna walk and ask him. the
And we're
question.
gonna see a lot more of you with labor issues coming
And
up,
then the
and
weather,
Senator Clark
which I just
is
wanted to
one.
ask you about.
So we have a number of witnesses to make sure we have a full handle on Budget Adjustment Act as it relates to this committee's jurisdiction. I see people in the hallway. Okay, so I don't know if people are people on Zoom, or should we go in any kind of order, or I see Maura. And Gus is in the hallway, but I think he's going to add first, so.
I know Josh is here.
Oh, Josh is here?
Sarah Phillips is here.
Oh, they're just outside? Okay, I do see a lot of people outside, okay. Senator Crystal, will you get Josh Hanford?
He's not out there.
Okay.
Gus is out there.
Is Gus ready now, or would he, there's Sarah Phillips. Maura, did you want to back clean up, or did you want to go in whatever order?
I'm happy to bet.
Let's do Sarah and Katarina. Did you, oh, there they, okay,
Everyone's in the hall.
okay. And Gus is going straight to
That's the
act, right?
I think Gus is this for me, Wendy?
Yes. Him last.
Yeah, he's going straight.
So Sarah and Katarina, we'll start with you if that's okay. And I just, as they're settling in, I just want to remind the committee that emergency housing and this type of assistance is primarily the jurisdiction of Senate Health and Welfare, but it obviously relates to whatever transition plan we're going to try to come up with to keep people housed. So I just want us to keep that in mind and not step too much on the toes of health and welfare. And we can't ask you also to speak for where things stand. I think we started to hear informally about a step down plan from motels, and we are curious. I think I won't speak for the committee, but the curiosity is around when and how people transition, and you know, how we develop that transition.
And can I just tag onto this?
Yeah.
So this is, we're not talking about the 21 million.
We are, this is
Okay.
specifically the
This-
21.
This is to the, so my understanding had been that from Sue Minter, that from one of you, that the CAP agencies were coming back with a plan. And I know that there's 175 million attached to that. That's for 24.
179 million?
Yeah, that's what I heard. Is that,
Is that the bigger affordable housing number that was out there?
Would you like us to begin?
Yes.
Yeah, so I should say for the record, Sarah Phillips, the
Yes.
Director of the State Office of Economic Opportunity and the Department for Children and Families.
And I'm Katarina Lasias, the Senior Advisor to the Commissioner of the Department for Children and Families.
Thank you.
So there is a document called Bridges to Housing that a number of community organizations have signed and submitted that outlines their goals. I can't, DCF is not part of developing that, so I
Oh,
can't
okay.
speak to that plan. We're not, that's not our plan, but but that document exists. I think that they provided it to you all, I'm guessing, or can, and they can speak to what's in that plan.
So I think just if we could start with your, we didn't skip over you, Commissioner, we just went.
you just weren't in
who's
the
here.
hall, so we.
If we could start with
Exactly.
with where the administration is on, you know, if March was the deadline, what the plan was after that for exiting people and transitioning them. And if that's not the plan, you know, what your perspective is on where the CAA is headed.
So I'm gonna defer to Katarina on
Okay.
general assistance emergency housing, since that's under economic services and not OEO.
Okay.
Obviously part of the collective PCF.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm gonna actually start back a little bit farther so that we can at least level set for
Great.
why we are where we are. So you all may know at the beginning of the pandemic, the DCF expanded the hotel and motel program to be eligible to anyone as a response to the pandemic for health and safety. Almost overnight, our numbers went from about 200 households to about 2,000 households, and have stayed pretty steady around 2,000 households. Right now, we're at 1,800 households being served in hotels and motels across the state. As we leveraged federal funding for that initial expansion through FEMA, as the pandemic has moved to endemic, that funding source through FEMA was no longer available. And we began to look for other federal funding sources to leverage to be able to support people in hotels and motels, which is when last year, in March 2022, we created the DCF Transitional Housing Program, which is still serving households and hotels and motels across the state, but is a little bit different than our historic GA program. It was a way to align a program with the exact requirements for the federal funding to leverage that funding as best we possibly could, because there were some misalignments with our GA program should we use that funding. Specifically, the way the federal requirements work was they would pay you, they would count a whole month, whether the person was served for a couple of days or that full 30 or 31 days, which is why the transitional housing program, that federal funding source has a full cap of 18 months for anyone in any program. So when someone only gets a couple of days, they might be better served in a different area. So when we announced that program in March, almost the same day, the US Treasury came out with new guidance that showed that we didn't have as much money as we thought we did for the program. And in fact, some of the ways to continue to keep that money made us spend money at a quicker rate to be able to capture the second bucket of funds. I think, thank you, Senator Clarkson. I think you are all aware, I'm just trying to provide that level set. So when we received that money, or when we received that news, it meant that the program would have to end earlier than anticipated, which meant not even through this fiscal year to the program is set to end on March 31st. There's been a lot of conversations around the Budget Adjustment Act of does that get extended, but it would have to be through state dollars, not leveraging federal funds. So the administration proposed ending that program on March 31st and having people transition out of the program. We have been working with partners around the state, but it would mean that people would no longer be eligible for that program, and that our historic GA program has reverted back to its pre-pandemic eligibility. So there would be households that are no longer eligible to be served in hotels and motels. The point I want to add to this conversation is that how we're serving households and hotels and motels is, while eligibility is pretty broad, we are limited by the number of motels around motel rooms around the state.
Do you know about how many are?
About 1,800.
Okay.
And we are
That's correct.
full.
Okay, 1,800 available.
Yes,
1,800 in hotel and motel rooms now.
yes, and we are full. So
Yeah.
when someone calls DCF or 211 on evening hours on the weekends, if there's not a room available, that household isn't served. So when you think about, are we serving everyone? We're in fact not, and it's a first come, first served basis right now. So if someone calls who is of a higher income, the program now serves up to 80% area median income, and they call and a room is available, we can get them in that room. If someone calls who's a lower income or has children or is disabled, and we don't have a room, they're not served. So I just want to make clear to the committee that while it's perceived that we are serving everyone, we're really just serving the number of people that can fit in the rooms around the
And
state.
first come, first served.
Yeah.
Do you have a percentage right now of a breakdown of the reason people give, domestic violence, eviction? Are you tracking that kind of information?
Because we're currently running 2 programs, we track that in our GA program, but transitional housing tracks, I guess I can say I'll follow up to see if we have all of that information.
Because that would be actually very helpful.
Okay. And so that's part of the conversation that we've had with House Human Services and the appropriations committees is when after March 31st, is there going to be a step down approach to serve specific vulnerable populations so that we're able to specifically serve those populations? Because right now, we don't have that discretion. Maybe discretion isn't the right word, but we don't have that ability to serve, more vulnerable populations.
Do you have, and I'm gonna Senator Parks and a question too, do you have any, does your department in any way put any intention out there around wanting to buy some of the motels? Will your department have any role in what happens to these motels, to these programs, if they're not coming to you for GA?
I think that I might defer to Sarah, but this is
Okay.
something we work really closely with our
Okay.
housing partners on.
Okay.
Yeah, so DCF doesn't purchase hotels,
That's
and doesn't build
VHCB.
housing.
Yeah.
And actually VHCB doesn't do it either,
But
right?
Twin
It's our
Pines?
network of,
Trusts.
affordable housing
Sure.
developers around the state, and VHCB administers those funds, that the
Right.
capital investment, but funds come from other sources as well. We have our capital partners in the room today who
Mhm.
talk more eloquently about that. There have absolutely been a number of hotels and motels that have been converted into permanent housing around the state
And
during
there's
the
one south.
pandemic. Yeah. And that not every hotel or motel is really viable as long-term permanent affordable housing, right? So I think there's a lot of good due diligence in when those decisions are made and those investments are made. And VHCB and our partners collaborate and consult very closely with DCF around anytime there's funding being invested in developing housing specifically for the homeless or emergency shelter development. We consult on all of those projects and collaborate.
I'm gonna go to Senator Parks, and I'll just say I'm watching the clock since we have.
Yeah, no,
5
no,
minutes.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we've moved on this pretty fast. I mean, this was low hanging fruit. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were hotels and motels bought. We're still in the process. The HCB is, in Twin Pines is closing on one now in Windsor County. I mean, this is ongoing. But as you say, Sarah, not everything's appropriate, but it's been
Okay,
a big push.
Senator Parks.
hotel and motels. I've been working with a homeless woman with 2 high-risk children. A motel is not how it's better than sleeping in her car, and she's done that on one occasion because she wasn't first in line. And they don't have, there's no cooking facilities, there's no food facilities. There's 2 beds and a woman and a couple kids. So when we buy these, they're probably, if there's food available elsewhere, we used to have lunch meals here. But when we buy them, are we just keeping them as this little single room? Or are we
No, they're being,
maybe combining? Because once there was a room available, but they said it was only available for 2 people, not 3. So, because it was too small, and her kid said, well, gee, it can't be any smaller than our car.
So when hotels or motels are purchased and redeveloped or converted into permanent affordable housing, they are made into permanent affordable housing. And so, yeah, they don't stay in necessarily the way that they are. I think I just want to go back to your first point, which is emergency housing and emergency shelter is meant to prevent people from being unsheltered.
Right.
And it is not good practice for so many reasons for so many people to be staying in emergency housing or emergency shelter settings for a long time. It's not trauma informed. It's really tough on our communities. It's not sustainable for families. Yeah, it does, right? Being homeless is traumatic for people inherently. So that is not our long-term goal, to meet all of Vermont's housing crisis needs through an emergency housing strategy. And I think, there is also in the VA, I just want to point it out, additional funds to expand rapid rehousing for families to try to help every family experiencing homelessness access rental systems to get into permanent housing. That we're making other investments in, we maintained our ERAP funded housing stability services. That became a priority to be able to leverage those services to help people get into housing and keep housing. So this is absolutely a very big issue to grapple with. I'm really glad you all are grappling with it. And it's, it can't be the only thing that we're talking about in terms of solving homelessness.
Can I quickly interject and say, are you the department that would be experiencing giving Section 8 vouchers to people and then having them returned, or that's a DHCD?
That's through the state house, that's through the public
That's
housing
through
authorities.
VSHA.
Yeah, which is
Okay.
not just Vermont State Housing Authority, but other
Okay.
public housing authorities, and we work closely with them.
Okay.
Yeah, and they have, there's definitely, when we fund a rapid housing project, we are
Mhm.
funding rental assistance for households for 12 to 18 months that helps them bridge to a permanent affordable housing choice voucher, like a Section 8. The benefit of that is that our partners in public housing authorities can help people lease in place. So instead of having this where they issue a voucher to someone and then the voucher expires because they can't lease up in time, that's awful, right? We never want that to happen.
Mhm.
If people are already have been helped into rental housing, they're receiving temporary rental assistance, we call it sometimes bridge rental
Mhm.
assistance or rapid rehousing. They can bridge to that housing choice voucher. They can stay in the same apartment and just flip to a permanent housing voucher. That's great. We did that with over 250 households with federal funds during the pandemic, and mostly families with children through what was called the CARES Housing Voucher Program. And we want to replicate that for sure.
Just I know we're trying to distill it into one question. So what I heard was you're working on a plan and you probably want to do a step down approach. So the question is, do you need somebody to say yes, do a step down approach, and how quickly can you put the plan together?
Right, that's,
When will the plan be ready?
I think the plan was a comment from community members, from Senator Clarkson.
well, my understanding was that the community action crowd was working with our housing partners developing, so we wouldn't have this cliff. As we know, many of us are hoping this won't happen until June 1st and that we'll have funding through June 1st. But then we definitely need a plan to slide people out of this rather than having them crash out.
Shouldn't we have a plan now?
Only it depends on where we end up with the BAA, because we will either have funding to go through June 1st or we will have a crash on March 31st.
And
Right.
I just want to be really explicit. Would you be involved in a plan? Do you have any responsibility for a plan, or does that then become another agency's responsibility?
We would welcome being involved in the
Okay.
plan. I would point,
Is someone who was supposed to be in charge of it from the state?
Yeah.
Like,
so we have been involved with various working groups,
Okay.
the GA working group.
who's
in particular.
leading that?
It does not have a charge right now, so it was DCF. We have developed various plans jointly with our housing partners over the years. We've developed a number of plans since the beginning of the pandemic. And we have used components of previous plans, such as the
Right.
roadmap to end homelessness, to
Right.
develop those plans. I would point to the roadmap as
Yeah.
being the most comprehensive plan
Yeah.
that we've had. That was written in 2016. So there might be some updating or additions needed to that plan, but that's probably the most comprehensive plan that we currently have for what we do.
Is there ownership of that plan? Like somebody is the authority and they're
Earhart.
supposed to implement that?
Earhart was the authority.
Well.
It was a legislative.
Okay, okay, so there's, okay. We have to move on because we have a lot of other witnesses. And we have to move to the other pieces of our BAA charge. It has to be.
I just feel like I'm sitting here and everybody's talking. We've got a lot of new homeless families and people because of the price of housing, because they've been evicted. And then we have some chronically homeless people that were there before the pandemic, and they've two different sets of needs. Some of them just need housing. And we've put all this money into building housing. We've got all these people someplace. But I guess is the plan, how do you get these people that are in the motels now and move them into the housing we're building? Where is that housing? When's it gonna be online? I mean, if you could say to someone, this is your apartment and in 6 months or 9 months, you're going to have that.
Right.
That gives you hope.
And that's not what that's why we have
Right.
other people getting in the witness chair. Gus is gonna talk about how many units they could create with how much
Right.
money and how fast, and hence you want that bridge to
Yeah.
something
We all
else for
want
people.
Yeah,
Everybody.
if you're willing, just throw
Yeah,
something. So there is a system in place to connect people to resources, whether it's about their immediate crisis needs or about connecting them on their long-term plan around housing. People exit homelessness in a variety of ways. Let me be clear, it's not always to a permanent apartment that they are leasing on their own. A lot of times it is family reunification, or it is going back to stay temporarily with family or friends. And that can be, if it's a safe alternative for people, that can work, and it is how people exit homelessness. Creating more permanent affordable housing is absolutely part of what we need to do. I will say, I've been doing this work and I'm really grateful and privileged to do it. There will not be a perfect plan where we will be able to identify every single individual's exit strategy and then make the decision to change this program. There will not be that perfect plan. And, but I do think there are ways to think carefully about how we transition out of very large scale usage of motels. And I think we have to do that work together, and DCF has been partnering with community partners and organizations. We hosted a lot of community engagement meetings last fall, talked with over 90 organizations and 300 partners, and extending what we're doing now in motels over the long term. It's not what partners and communities wanted us to do. So we responded to that. We put forward proposals that we think spoke to what people's priorities were. And we shared that report with you, and happy to follow up and make sure you have access to that again.
Thanks so much. I really do have to.
It's just really
Okay,
important
okay.
to just say that the communities are waiting for a plan. And I don't mean to criticize you, but is there anything this committee can do to help a plan be
I think
produced?
the plan is housing.
No, but that's
Well,
the
it's not
long-term
all
plan.
housing, it's trauma, it's all the things we're doing. It's
No,
all.
but a plan to transition out of this, out of the hotel, out of the hotel extension.
I think there have been a number of plans that have been put forward.
There are
And
plans.
there is no one collective consensus plan out there. And that's true. That consensus collective plan does not exist.
Who's like jumping out of their chair to be our next witness on that plan and what's needed?
Thank you.
Commissioner, you look like you had something you wanted to say, so I'm going to you next. So you
Gus,
can
I
get
don't
witness.
Here to talk about this so much, but I will add a comment.
Sure,
If
bridge us
anybody-
to your piece of it with missing middle
Yeah.
and with
Sure.
building other housing.
Josh Holberg, Commissioner of Housing and Development. Thank you. I mean, I think some of the frustration, maybe my colleagues and myself, is there's been 3 plans that have been submitted to end this. No one likes the outcome at the end of the plan
Which
because
is,
we haven't rehoused everyone that needs housing. And that is not going to change, unfortunately.
And keeps being refilled.
And so that is a struggle. We have to recognize that our neighboring states don't have the same programs we do. We have to recognize that there's new housing challenges every day, and people that are successful become unsuccessful. And so I think what the college are trying to express is maybe we ought to move beyond that. We're going to have this perfect plan that everyone agrees with, and everyone will be housed on July 1st. Because we can't accomplish that. But what we may be able to accomplish is a more compassionate way to house those that need the housing the most and they're the most vulnerable, and they get priority in a system that maybe has enough housing to address their needs.
right.
And we're not at that rational place yet.
Can I just, so one of the kind of loose ends that everyone keeps coming to me about outside of the committee is we're talking about hotels and motels, but we have a lot of defunct college campuses in the state. And people have said, is there something in the bill that helps with those? What's happening with VHFA? What's happening with schools in Bennington and Rutland County?
Yeah.
We put a small placeholder in the bill that hasn't gotten much attention that might just disappear about SROs and dormitory style pilot programs. We do have places that have capacity right now And is that at all an option that could fit into the plan or has been part of the plan?
I would say it has been. There's
Okay.
been look at all these opportunities. I
Okay.
mean, the Interfaith Coalition, had a big press and
That's
demand
right.
last year. And I said, have you inventoried the number of your own properties that have available space? In Bradford, there's 30 or 40 units in a old monastery that they would be happy to house. And
Okay,
HS knows about that as a factor. There's been those conversations ongoing. I think it's hard to compel Vermont College of Fine Arts and their
Sure.
neighbors to say, you must do this, but I know that
Neighbors
every one
already
of,
seem to be
Got a
resistant to
letter this
everything.
morning.
every one of those options is on the table and has a lot of awareness of those housing resources that are out
and is
there.
there anything we can do to help, or should we let that go and just know that those conversations are happening?
I guess funding to make them happen.
Okay. We'll just have-
I think the bill with the land use regulations to allow shelters and affordable housing to exist in more places, clearly, because they can be stopped at this point.
Mhm.
I think that even our hotel motel situation has some challenges in that regard, that if, folks sort of take it to the next level and say, this isn't a lodging property, this
Yeah.
is serving as a homeless shelter, is it even allowed in that zoning district?
Right.
So we have,
I meant to say
Yeah.
that to Katerina, because Monday is a holiday, we really need language changes to be in by tomorrow. So that council has time, and I know you and DLA, is that loop's been closed?
Oh, yeah,
Okay,
I can follow up.
that would be great. We just need to know what we're doing by tomorrow. Senator Harris.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just one more thing about the plan. If, I would like to see one of the three that you all prefer. That-
most of the
well,
plans
I
have been
guess-
done in conjunction with community partners.
Okay.
Yeah,
And,
they exist on our website. The Road to End Homelessness is on our.
Okay,
our
well, let me
website.
just step back a second. You have a third of the legislature are new, right? So we don't know, at least some of us
Right,
don't know
that's fair.
about these plans. And I've been involved in discussions in our community, and there's a lot of anxiety, both about how it works now, like the phone number has issues, you guys probably know, but about what to do when it ends. And there's not clarity at the local level about what we're going to do. So even if there isn't a plan that's accepted by everybody, there will be a default plan, which is what the administration, I would expect, does, because that's where the funding comes from. And the administration knows about how these funding stacks work and, like you said, the changes, that's critical. So I would just like to know, so I can communicate it to my constituents, what will happen if we don't have a formal plan that's adopted by whoever we would like it to be adopted by? Because something logical needs to happen, and we need to know sooner rather than later. And it's already pretty soon. I mean, March, the end of March is soon.
Yeah, if we can
More
get
will
the,
happen as the BAA is finished. So you will have
But
more clarity.
But knowing what will happen as a default could help us make the decisions in the BAA and, right?
So we can get you those plans. I think the challenge has been
or
that
just-
there was a step down, there was all those things were part of the budget build last year
Yeah,
and during the summer with the joint fiscal office. And then what happens is you get towards the end and people don't like the results of that. And so you start over and
And if the policy committees don't make the decision, the appropriations committee has to
well,
make the decision.
what is likely
can
to
share those.
happen? That's what I'm interested in, and what they're interested in, is what is likely to happen. So, I mean, you don't have to tell me now, but I think that's important to get out there. What will happen if we don't take any action?
Do you want to reintroduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, Katerina Lascias, Senior Advisor to the Commissioner at the Department for Children and Families. I will say, so when we developed the plan, when we knew the federal funding was coming to an end, we also had our communication plans to households roll out. So since December and January, households in this program have received letters from the department. We launched our coordinated care teams. So there are extra supports in hotels and motels working with every household to determine what their exit strategy is. So households are aware that the program is going to ramp down, which I believe is part of your question.
That is part of my question, and then the other part are the agencies, the local agencies that,
Yes, we communicate those same communications with the local.
okay, and the towns, because I'm hearing that people are not aware of that, not individuals, but the folks who are involved in ordinances and having facilities. that they are not aware of a clear plan.
I guess I can say thank you for the feedback. We have
Okay,
shared quite a
Okay,
bit with
good,
them.
maybe, and I don't doubt that, so maybe if I could,
Yeah, you can
be
follow up.
provided that, that would be really,
And
really
you two
helpful.
can connect with.
Yeah.
Appropriate.
Okay, but the bottom line is we can have all the plans we want, but until there is housing to transition people into, they're worth about the paper they're written on. We can plan, but I've got a motel full of people in my neighborhood and there's no housing to move. There's not, there must be 20 units up there. There's no 20 units of housing in Montpelier, never mind affordable housing, to move those people in, and that's,
I understand,
Yeah.
and that's why this
That's
bill is so
yeah.
important, it's a good
but I
transition.
mean, that's,
Right.
that's.
Right, so
we
we're
can
doing
plan,
medium
but
and
it's
long
not
term, but-
Senator Brock.
And that's the issue that we've been talking about, perhaps not enough, and that's the issue of time. Everything that we do takes far too long. And if there's anything that we have to emphasize is how do we eliminate the delays? How do we improve the time issue? How do we get things done faster, simpler, easier?
We might also look at the effective dates of some of the pieces of our bill
Correct.
and speed some of them up, in fact, and we haven't had that conversation yet.
So maybe as a way to transition to that goal and that, the 408 VHIP units created today, over 300 have served families exiting homelessness. Since we're using existing properties, typically there's 6 months needed to bring them back online. So it's a quicker than a net new build. It's not the only solution and it won't be enough to satisfy this need, but it's part of the solution. And transitioning to the BAA, the governor had a modest ask in there to add 5 million to VHIP because our existing homeownership partners have more demand than the funding we have on hand could provide them with through the rest of this fiscal year. So that was the basis of that $5 million.
That's for BAA,
For BAA.
and that isn't currently there.
Yes,
It is.
It is. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that,
It's been
okay, but we
supported
haven't been
into
arguing
housing.
about it. Okay.
BAA money
And
is
it's
there.
supported in the
Okay.
House and positive testimony in the Senate.
Okay,
Great. I think what,
Is the 6 months sort of the average time that, because
Yeah.
that's very fast.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
the
in all
fastest
fairness.
money.
there's some that take much longer and there's some that are quicker, but if you realize you're, an ADU would be example of something that took a lot longer. They're building net new, adding an attached unit, but if you have a unit that is already existed, but it doesn't meet code, it's out of safety compliance, to bring that back online might need, changing the heat system, doing some plumbing, fixing the roof. You can get those units online quick.
No, that's one of the reasons we have loved it, that low hanging fast fruit.
I think what you wanted me to talk about was that the challenge here with the House adding 96 million on top of the governor's recommend in the BAA that brings concern to the governor is that it may preclude what choices we make for housing investments in FY24 because it's going to come out of the same money.
ARPA money.
General fund. It's just going to,
All
it's
is it
going,
all
all
general?
general fund.
Okay,
It's going to potentially limit what we can do, including some of the initiatives and programs, new initiatives and programs that you're discussing in this committee. The choices that could be made with funds could be precluded and be made without much time for policy discussions on them with that large of investment made before those discussions have happened. The BAA should be used to fund existing shortfalls in programs that we know we can fund and increase housing today. And there's been several of those identified. And so that's really all I have to add to this discussion. It's just the House put large chunks of housing investment without defining what it could go for, what the timeline is.
Right.
And that could preclude discussions for housing programs investments the rest of this session in the larger scheme of the budget, which if they're not directly funding deficits in programs that we have operating today, that seems to be really taking a lot off the table for members of this body to make choices about our housing investments.
Senator Clarkson.
No, we're about to hear from Gus. So we're going to hear about the 50 million, what the plan is for it. or is my question to you or is it getting out the door faster in the BAA and therefore less time? And or are we accelerating some of this development? Is what I'm hoping we will hear from Gus, is that 50 million is actually supports everything we passed last year and the year before and is continuing to get it out the door.
Yeah,
So, it's.
And that's the 50 million proposed by the House, which probably already has taken a new form because BAA will be voted out.
Yeah,
And it's the $50 million question.
Appropriations.
right. I mean, I think one reference point, and I see Moore's in the room, maybe she'll talk to this, but the program that was funded last year, the Missing Middle Homeownership, was a $15 million appropriation. Application's been open only since December. There's 24 million in requests, and that decision is going to happen next month. So we're going to say no to almost half of the applications if there isn't more money made available now to fund those projects,
But there
which will
is.
be in construction in the summer.
But there is in the BAA. more
No,
money for
there's
this.
not. There's
Oh, I
not
thought
more
there
money
was.
for Missing Middle in the BAA.
Sorry.
Can I just say this is like a bigger question, but I've been asked in this room and others, I think we all just have the understanding with Missing Middle that those are year-round residents,
Yes,
but
they have lots of restrictions on them.
they,
Yeah.
okay, so I just want to be able to answer that question formally for people that it's not really possible for someone to not be a Vermont resident.
You have to remember 33% of the fundings is at least 33% must go to shared equity, which has a
Right.
lower income level.
Right.
The rest, yes, it has income restrictions, modesty to the home constructed, a total development cap. It's very, I would say it has been appropriately regulated to ensure that it addresses modest income, full-time Vermont residents' needs without much chance for abuse.
I needed that on the record for Missing
Yes.
Middle, because, just any
That's,
housing.
it
units
was
we're
the
building at this
design,
point.
yes.
That's part of what we built in.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm sure, more information on the selections, there's a prioritization,
Mhm.
distribution, trying to serve, the lowest income, trying to get the most benefit for the location, as far as smart growth, all those things are part of the design. And as you can see, it's very competitive. So we will be able to select the best of the best, but without more money into this program now, there will be $10 million worth of no's.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, are those 10 million, are a good amount of them ready to go? Are they good applications?
My understanding is that they have been reviewed for their ability to move forward quicker. I don't know all the details because I haven't seen the board packet, but my understanding is the application itself prioritized these projects to move quickly.
So some of the ones that are not able to be recommended because of the funding limits are still worthy of serious consideration? Is
I
that
believe so.
accurate?
I believe so. I haven't
Okay.
seen them all, but I believe that represents a large sort of geographic area of the state and a diversity of project type and developer type and all of that. And so it's representative of a new housing program that we just started last year, which already doesn't have enough funding to meet the demand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I want to get Gus
Yep.
in the witness chair and Maura, because Maura if this might be the last time we have Maura scheduled to be in the witness chair, and we have a couple other things that we were going to talk about too with Maura, but Gus, I'm sure you don't always look like you're about to jump out of your seat, but I know you have lots to say on these things, so we appreciate.
He's a better poker player than us.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I'd hate to play bridge with you, I guess.
You'd love to play bridge with me. I would have no clue.
You say that now.
For the record, Gus Seelig, Director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Before I get into the BAA, I just want to say that I think that the efforts that Sarah has led and along with her team have just been heroic. And getting 3,000 households into permanent housing since the
Yeah.
pandemic is an incredible thing.
Yeah, it's true. We could celebrate that in articles about our rate of homelessness increase, that we also have the most compassionate response. So
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, so
thank you.
that just needs to be said, even
Yeah.
as we struggle with the reality that there are 1,800 households and many hundreds of children without housing today, without permanent housing. As was said earlier, we worked very closely, and Jen Holler put a lot of time into the roadmap and homelessness,
Yeah.
which has really become the guide that we've all used together since the pandemic began, and has been really useful. Doesn't mean we can't add to it or improve it. And we pulled together, and I think I spoke about this, a housing recovery working group that all of us participate in. We've been meeting about every 2 weeks since very early in the pandemic to talk about how do we coordinate resources, how do we put together deals that move things together as closely as possible. We are getting our partners across the state to utilize the coordinated entry system to help people get into permanent housing when it becomes available. And as you all know, a huge number of Vermonters are given Section 8 vouchers and cannot find anybody, a vacant apartment, and the landlord willing to accept them. And I think the State Housing Authority, were they here today, would say one of the most important things at this moment is to add to supply, and they are getting waivers from project-based, more of those certificates, which is really important because when the dollars are unspent, HUD takes the view that, oh, you don't need as much money. So once she can commit, Housing Authority can commit to project-based, they won't look at taking those dollars away. So our long-term strategy has been in part about that. Section 8 voucher also allows a developer to use more debt. I need to be clear and I think delicate on the Budget Adjustment Act. The governor's proposal did not include more resources above our last year's base level of VHCB funding, one-time funding for VHCB beyond our total allocation of about $21 million. The House has proposed $50 million. I think your colleagues down the hall are planning to do something less in the BAA. We have, from the monies provided to us, told you that this year we were funding, putting into production or completing about 1,000 units across the state. Just 2 weeks ago, our board, which Maura is a member of, added several hundred units to that pipeline. We have about $42 million left to allocate between ARPA and one-time funding. We expect to be able to fully allocate that funding in this fiscal year. How much of a BAA appropriation we will allocate in that fiscal year, I cannot be sure of, and I told this both to the House committee and to the Senate committee previously. But the importance and the reason I think that you allocated both CRF funding and the BAA and other funding was that it sends a signal to the development community, which is very sensitive to the issue of, can I get my project funded? And sort of the issue of, can you speed up development? Whether you use the BAA or not will tell people whether to speed up and spend money on permitting and design and lining up investors or not is the critical issue. And you, the legislature and the governor, have to figure out whether you want to continue to do that, but we continue to have a great shortage of housing. So I have not said on the record that we will get 50 million more committed and out the door by June 30th. It really is about that signal to the development community. In that context, we are funding all kinds of housing that includes more multifamily, permanently affordable housing, housing for farm workers, home ownership in conjunction with a shared equity program. Now we're supporting manufactured home communities. We are supporting and increasing funding for the Vermont Center for Independent Living's home access program that allows people to stay in their homes when they have a severe mobility impairment that without a bathroom modification or a ramp might make it impossible for them to do so. So there's a range of activity that we are prepared to do more on, and you and the governor need to come to terms with what's the right number for that.
Now, while we have you in the witness chair, this might seem like an aside, but this bill has many more committees to go to. Is VHCB or one of the partners trying to keep track of the cost of delays and litigation and lost time as part of the dollars we allocate. I think we need to start being able to make that case to committees that don't hear the same feedback we hear.
Yeah, and I think Senator Brock raised this a year or so ago in terms of the permitting issues that you're now working on in this bill contribute to cost. We have a project that we and the HFA have provided both one-time funding and tax credits to, and well, not tax credits yet, but they applied for tax credits in Putney. And a single community supports the project. Single person has appealed, case has not yet gone to court, so it's been just about a year. And I would expect that when they win the appeal, which we expect they will, it's in a designated area. It's right across from the food co-op. It's a great location. The costs will go up somewhere between 10 and 20% from what they were a year ago. So delays have a real impact on costs.
Is there someone in your agencies that might be willing to put a ballpark figure on the last year's worth of funding, or the one-time funding, and how much has got to, how much got lost in delays and litigation?
I'm not sure we could, I mean, we're also in an environment where, we've been using for years and years very skilled construction estimators, and this is not just a Vermont problem. Morris staff has put together a national profile of the question of cost escalation. It's going on everywhere. So I think over the last, Evernorth's reporting about a 38% jump over the last 2.5 or 3 years in the cost of construction statewide. So the longer it takes to get started, the further away we are from getting to actual bids. At some point, will things stabilize? I sure hope so. But we haven't solved the problem of not having a shortage of skilled workers. We are still dealing in many cases with supply chain interruptions. And what that means for a development is, if you're in construction, this was the case for that project we've shown you in downtown St. Johnsbury, and the delivery of the elevator was delayed for 4 months. And that means you carry more construction interest because you can't get to your permanent closing. So all those things contribute.
This isn't just permitting, it's the windows from wherever they're being built.
The windows, the elevator, the mechanical systems, all of that.
Yeah, just noodle on how you can write some of this down, whether it's project by project, and you take the top 5 that specifically.
We can certainly give you examples.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
The best ones, right, still right here.
I do want to just, Senator Brock asked a very important question, and I meant to follow up in writing the last time I was here, but you asked about the cost of things. And I talked that day about replacing, utilizing mobile homes or manufactured homes on vacant lots. The other thing that Vermont has done in a big way in order to save money has been to convert hotels into housing. And some of that has been quite successful, some of it, and saved us a lot of money. So we are very aware of how expensive this is to undertake. We're open to any great idea. Every project is competitively bid. And so the marketplace is telling us what it's going to cost. But this will not, our real estate market and our construction market has been transformed over the course of the pandemic for many, many reasons. And everything is just much pricier. And the story that I will, some of you have heard me say in the past, is my daughter wanted to build a 1,500 square foot home. And by the time Huntington Homes was ready to, which was a reputable manufacturer, to build the boxes, cost declined without any site work at all, or the cost of land, to $438,000. So she dropped that. We are seeing the same thing in multifamily housing, where there are different codes to comply with, of significant cost escalation. And I think the question is not just going to be one-time funding, but as a policy matter for this committee and for those of you who serve on the finance committee, perhaps for the treasurer, is been looking down the road, knowing we need thousands of units. how would we do another housing revenue bond?
Right.
Are there resources that you want to look at from a tax perspective to raise revenue? Because I don't think that Vermont can be what we all want it to be and tolerate the housing shortage. I think the governor's actions throughout the pandemic has kind of been, let's find every good idea. Josh's team has done a great job on the VHIP program. We've expanded shelter capacity across the state. 2 weeks ago, we funded the first new shelter in Lamoille County, the first shelter in Lamoille County ever that will house 21 Vermonters. So we're looking at every possible option to provide housing for Vermonters.
Probably have time for a couple questions.
Yes, Justin, you may not have this off the top of your head, although you may, maybe something that you provide us separately. We're looking for the one or two best ideas in the state that can come to the legislature to help us define ways in which we can speed this process up. How can we knock down the delays that take, in effect, cause us to spend forever getting a housing project approved and built? What would you recommend that we do from a policy standpoint to expedite things?
Well, I think some of it is in your bill, and I don't know if it's in your bill because I haven't followed it closely, but I think we have to rethink how how long it takes for appeals to be heard and whether there is a way, and maybe you've addressed this, I mentioned before that New Hampshire has gone to a housing appeals board in order to try to speed up the process. So I think that's whatever the outcome, getting to a conclusion of yes or no, rather than a long time in the courts, is a real problem for us.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, and when you just talked about the Putney project, I heard you say that it hasn't gone to the court yet, because we heard from the court.
It's in the courts. I don't.
Oh, it
think
is in the
I don't
courts,
think
okay.
it's in the, in other words, project's been appealed. I don't think the case has been heard.
Okay,
And
I thought maybe there was another
okay.
delay before it even gets to court, but that's not the
no,
case.
but like when it's heard, judges usually don't write the decision within a week or two.
And we are speaking with them.
Yeah, and even if we added our support for another position, that would make this bill have to go to judiciary. So, we're trying to be delicate about they recognize the need, they even said people are sitting in jail and people are not reunified with their kids because of housing. And we're, the fact that they're keenly aware of that, I think was really valuable.
So I wish I could say to you that there's going to be just one or two good ideas. And that's why I whether you love the VHIP program, the missing middle program, you want to expand shelter capacity, we need to expand rental housing. I think we have such a difficult market today that we need to do all of that.
I need to do it all.
I wish that there was just one answer. You have been a voice, Senator, for, really looking at the permitting piece of it. I support that. It's one piece of it. If it costs $438,000 for a 1,500 square foot home, we're just in a different place for most people, working people in Vermont, than we've ever been before. And even if you can shave 50,000 off the cost of that, we're still in a different place, especially given the increase in interest rates.
Okay. Thank you. We're just getting advice about if there are pieces we can do that don't require it to go to
Right, we're just talking
judiciary.
about the appeals, because we have a piece in here about the zoning appeals, but not about the Act
And
50
the
appeals.
de novo issue, I always thought would make it go to judiciary, but if I'm wrong,
But that's
to be wrong.
what's delayed us, is the Act 50 appeals, not just zoning appeals.
Yeah, well, the other thing, and we're seeing lots of municipalities really get involved in housing in a significant way, but even when they are, again, one citizen, we give citizens lots of rights in Vermont.
Right.
They are your constituents, and how we balance that with the need to meet this moment for Vermont is a really.
So for that, we don't even require 10 people. It can be one person.
No, it can be one, it can be one abutter.
Yeah.
That's the Act 250
Okay,
piece,
abutter,
that,
yeah.
right, that's not the zoning.
I'm not the lawyer here
Right,
to
right.
tell you exactly.
If we can make magic happen in a short time, we will try to do that. Thanks so much, Gus.
Okay.
Maura,
Where is Bewitched?
you are our
when you need her?
speediest witness always, so we appreciate that.
Thanks.
Buckle up, Buttercup.
I know, right?
Yeah. And I will have some break, but I don't want to shortchange Alan, because that just means we'll take more lunch or morning time away from you. Thank you, Maura.
Thank you. My name's Maura Collins. I'm with Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Scott is about to hand out something because I got nervous when I heard this was my last chance to comment.
I mean,
Me
maybe, you know.
No, I'm just saying.
In the witness chair, probably.
Nope. So thank you, Scott. I know you all know this, but Scott is just a rock star.
Yeah.
He is.
Every
I'm sure we
turn.
can say that on the record.
No, he is
Icon
just,
status.
as all of the committee systems go, I'm saying there's a
We
Special
know,
place
we
for Scott.
fought hard for him.
Yeah, I'm gonna go quickly. You've spoken about I'm not gonna speak to what's in front of you first, just so you know,
Right,
but
yeah.
the BAA, you've
Mhm.
heard some testimony. There's been talk about this missing middle income homeownership program. So I appreciate Commissioner Hanford speaking to that. As a reminder, you've seen the slide before. It's in your on your website from an earlier time of testified. But there's 17 applications that we received within 2 months for $23 million. It's 141 homes, just shy of 300 bedrooms, 15 different towns in 9 counties, an average of 1,500 square feet. The question to readiness, I'm gonna be honest, mix of readiness. Some of them need the board meeting to happen in March before they break ground once the earth is thawed, but others will take a little longer. I'm gonna say those ones roughly are some of the ones that hit the geographically underserved communities. So Northeast Kingdom and some of the areas where smaller developments, a little harder to get done, good, deep, policy-rich proposals. So I think you all, I'm hearing Senator Brock loud and clear about the urgency, the timing restrictions, and I agreed with everything Gus said about those quickest few things you can do. I agree with him. I think your bill's already doing a lot of them. I think the appeals are something we can look at. And I think that looking at both municipal and Act 250 permitting is very important. It's not one or the other. It's all, so your bill is doing great things. I will say that you have a balancing act of urgency around the homeownership program and the ones that are exciting because they'll be starting, by May or June. And then the ones where it's about the accessibility for communities in the underserved areas in the state and that they may take a little longer. But we have those applications. My team is underwriting them right now. So when you said, are they all good? I don't know yet. I haven't gotten a report, but we're digging into the numbers. We need to balance that fiscal prudence and responsibility with the urgency that I'm hearing from you all. But we have a long track record of doing that. So I'm convinced we're going to hit that sweet spot when this gets to our board in March. So there is a need clearly for more missing middle homeownership. I'm going to speak to that because now I'm going to shift over to the bill that you have. The VHFA related sections start on page 34. It's section 34. And right now it has in there $1 million to expand the first generation homebuyer grant program. That's the piece of paper Scott handed out to you. I previewed this for you a while back that if we were to get new money, we would recommend a tweak to the eligibility definition, which is the piece of paper Scott just gave you. This would make it more in alignment with what other states are doing, kind of best practices. We've all, in different states, we've learned as we've rolled out these new programs, and we're, as the quote goes, you do the best you can until you know better. When you know better, you do better. So we would shift from the word applicant to the word home buyer. This is going to be a hard one for you to take in because what I'm saying is that not every person on the mortgage would need to qualify. Only one would need to qualify. You may not like that. You may say, no, I want to know that everyone is a first generation home buyer. I don't want to know that there's a spouse who maybe had access to something. But I need you to know that when we talk about accessibility and what customers are thinking about and expecting, they're walking in thinking only one of them has to qualify, and they are getting told bad news when they find out that that's not the case. And so shifting that one applicant has to qualify as first generation is what people are asking for. And so I'm bringing that, and that is what other states has done. That does open the door a little more, although the next change closes the door a little more to match with legislative intent, which is, we had borrowed the language from the feds, which said that the parents don't own a home right now or in the last 3 years. That made it all very current. And I believe legislative intent was more about that the parents had never owned a home.
Correct.
And so this goes to an attestation about during the home buyer's lifetime never had. I'm gonna say that both my parents had passed away more than 3 years ago. So I could say that my parents never, haven't owned a home in 3 years. That is ignoring the fact that they died earlier than they thought they were going to. And, there was a little generational wealth passed on to the next generation. And so that closes that door in that way. The third thing is that we added something about if the parent lost a home due to what I'm going to call a negative circumstance, foreclosure, deed in lieu, short sale, they should qualify because they probably lost everything with that. Are there questions about there? Can I continue on?
No, I think that's good. Good and clear.
So section
Can I ask
3,
a question?
yes.
Just regarding home buyer. Let's say you have a married couple. Does this apply to both or only one?
Would be one.
One. So the other person's parents could own a mansion and they qualify?
That is possible. And so you may say you don't like that piece of the change. Yeah, this is in alignment, as I said, with what Rhode Island and I believe Massachusetts and a couple other states are doing though. And this is sort of the conventional wisdom that I think a growing number of states are moving toward. This change of just having it be one. We're tracking all sorts of data though. This is $1 million. It's probably going to affect 50 to 60 households. So there is a way of the first $1 million you gave us last year. We're going to continue to track what's going on there. We can track the next one, and this is not opening it too largely.
Right.
But
So you'll be back next year reporting on how this change affects.
Yeah.
And we want to get the money out the door, and right now in this housing market,
But
one
when you
person
report,
has
how
any
will
wealth.
you know that the other parent doesn't own that mansion?
oh,
And it passed on generational wealth.
I would report to you back. I have data on gifts, and we know how much in gifts people are getting. We already
So that
have
would,
some
that
data
would apply
historically.
as a second home buyer as well.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that this program, if we compared all VHFA borrowers and how many gifts they have and the amount of that to this program, we're gonna see fewer gifts in this program as a source of funds.
We can dwell on this outside of committee, but you have data, right? Is that, are you prepared to talk about?
Yep, about, I'm
data
sorry,
collection?
data collection, I can jump to that.
Was there something else?
Yeah, well, I just
Okay.
want to say that
There's the
in,
energy.
no, I actually want to say sections 3.6 and 3.7, you have the missing mill home ownership.
Yeah.
And this is not BAA, this is now in your bill. You have $5 million. There's a section now, section F, speaks to the things we're gonna do before the program starts and the outreach and the geographic targeting and all that. With $5 million, based on the applications we've seen, that would probably create about 25 homes. There would probably be about 3 housing developments. I can't promise I can reach all the policy goals you have
Okay.
in section F with only 3 projects. If you're looking for geographic diversity and underserved communities and all that.
That had been a nod to the backlog, which may or may not be taken care of in BAA. And I think the question for this whole bill then becomes, are we recommending a new amount of money for this program to create a new eligibility? And I'm happy to say yes, and then appropriations will have the final word, but what amount of money after the backlog is addressed were you thinking to keep this program, it's going to become an annual program?
I'm gonna say that we're hearing from developers, and I think you'll hear from developers, that there is continued demand for the homeownership program. It is a continuum, and the more we can release the valve on the top of the system, the better the whole system works.
Okay, we actually, while we're on this section.
This is on page 37F. I finally found that.
We did have an appraiser come in who had, was a font of knowledge in 15 minutes from Rutland. And on page 35, he recommended we look at the 120% of area median income and the 35% of development costs. You may have heard that he felt like 120 should go up to 150. And with the 35%, he felt like that was a bit generous and we might take that down. Well, so do you have any, you don't have to comment right now, but.
No, I can tell you, we hear all the time that 120 is too low. That is
Yeah.
an argument.
Okay.
It was a new program. I think there was nervousness about subsidizing higher income households, but we're hearing that on the, interestingly, we hear that as much or more on the rental RLF program. You've heard a lot of testimony about going up to 150%.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten to
interesting
that one yet, but
Right.
I would
So,
agree. on-
I keep hearing that too. We are the vehicle for the program. You tell us what you want to do. The 35% was a nice tie-in to a federal tax credit that is not yet passed, but is being discussed.
Interesting.
That sets it at 35% of the total development cost. I like that connection alignment because it should that tax credit ever come out, this would be a leverage source that could go with it.
And if
having
we
things-
did 30, it wouldn't, they wouldn't have the same eligibility.
Correct.
Okay.
We
Okay.
do have caps on the units. though,
However,
let's
that,
remember.
sorry, that has not yet passed. What is the likelihood of that being passed?
No,
So,
I don't
I mean-
want to talk about DC, but I don't,
I mean, but that's quite honestly a problem. I mean, for us to pin something on something that hasn't yet passed in a dysfunctional Congress does strike me as maybe something that we might want to reconsider
There
and
is
look at it for
sometimes
next year.
agreement on tax credits more than anything, but.
there is, there
Different
also are unit caps though. It's the lesser of 35% of the total development cost or some amount of money, right? Right, there's a cap on the unit count. I'm sorry, I want to.
It's okay, we can, well, we can just,
There are other caps
Josh
in
is
place.
thinking about it.
that's something we can think about offline, I
Yeah.
think.
I'm
So we,
worried I'm confusing the rental RLF, which I know has caps of 100,000 and 125,000 per unit. And I'm sure my phone is buzzing by my coworkers.
I want to
listening
make sure we
me.
get at least a 5-minute break.
Yep.
For everyone's sake.
Just want to,
But we're cool on the
Yeah.
150.
I think that is, yeah. I
On
hear
both,
you.
actually, while we're on this,
150 on homeownership and rental.
and the revolving.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if 120 is $74,000
It
in this
depends on the
county,
market, yeah.
I
I'll just
wouldn't want to.
say out loud and people can come to us in the next 24 hours. Some people have said allocate some for a certain income range and some for a different income range and look at, people
Oh,
who.
interesting.
remember that 1/3 have to be shared equity. I also
Right.
want to say if this language, you're not,
That's, yeah, maybe we should
I
just
think
give you
we
the
have-
flexibility to
because-
do the thing.
don't change the
Yeah.
income limits to the BAA because those applications are already in hand.
Yeah,
This would be if there were new money.
right.
And so of the new money, again, $5 million is going to create about 28 homes.
Okay,
So-
so yeah, it was like a placeholder amount of money that hasn't changed because.
So
BAA
where,
wasn't
sorry,
flat.
what page is the money? Because I'm trying to.
I don't know.
Section 37, it's,
It's the, yeah, the appropriation
It's
comes
on
separately
page-
from the
It's at the
program.
end.
yeah,
Page
top of page
39.
39. I wanna, I could,
Yeah, we have 2-ish minutes. And if you
Oh,
don't
there we
feel
are.
ready to talk about data.
No,
we
I
can-
am.
okay.
So,
I wanna-
Sorry, before we leave the
Yeah.
5 million. So
Yeah.
5 million, I can see is not adequate, in your opinion. What is your ideal?
20
Just
million.
saying, this is the
20
moment to
million.
dream. Yeah. that's what I
Okay,
thought.
great.
Yep.
Not whatever amount of money, but
Yeah.
that's, thank you.
I'm not gonna read it, but the occupancy requirement is firm and in alignment with what
Great.
you wanna see, I'm gonna say.
You mean
And,
Full-time resident. Occupant,
yes,
yeah.
correct.
So I'll just say,
Uh,
I'm circling in the rental program, the 122 and 150 change.
Yeah, I noticed that you went down from the governor's recommend of 15 to 15 million from 20 million.
These are all like
I'm just calling that out.
squishy
but that
numbers
is-
until we look at
So-
the HCB and the full request. We have 150 million that applicants have requested.
The last thing I'm gonna
Yeah.
say, if I may, about rental data is that I think you would be very pleased with the data you already have sitting in the tax department when it comes to the landlord certificate. Right now, if you were to ask the tax department to create an annual report for you that doesn't show individual records, but instead asked about data, you could pull up information on how many renters by town, what the rental prices are, how many bedrooms, where the landlord lives versus where the tenant lives. There's a lot of good information in the landlord certificate. There, right now, when I say that you could find out how much they're renting for, that's only for subsidized units. There's an exception that if it's not subsidized units, then they don't have to report how much the rent is. You could look to change the landlord certificate to say, tell us the rental amount for all the units. There's no coding, I don't think, in a database. It's just who fills out that field. The problem with the landlord certificate, which is already required on the books, system is in place, is that we don't think that we're getting great compliance, because when we look at all the forms entered each year and we know there's 80,000 rentals, that doesn't match up. So you could consider either, I mean, you all have this debate all the time, carrot or stick. Do you want to have a fine for people who don't fill out their landlord certificate? Do you want to have an incentive to participate, that maybe then you participate in what I know Kathleen Burke is going to speak about the
risk mitigation.
Thank you. Or you could ask the Department of Taxes. I don't know how their lives work, but can they cross-check like a rent, income filing with, if someone's submitted a form? But that's only for Vermont income tax folks. And I know some landlords are businesses and some are out of state. And so maybe that wouldn't catch everything.
So
I'm not familiar with the statute that
That's
governs
the last
the landlord
question,
piece.
because Charlie Baker from CCOPC has submitted another proposal that Maura's workshopping with Ellen that I've seen, that gets to some of the other pieces around the grand list, and can we just ask
It's in your
the number
bill.
of units? It's already there, great. So this is the last, I just want to put a fine point on that because it's temporary. So I'm looking at Senator Clarkson. I know everyone cares about rental information, but if you can by Friday, dwell on that, we need to take a break now.
What's in your bill has the grand list now will have a numeric field so you can see.
So we're
how
gonna
many
go
units.
offline and take a 5-minute
Okay, so
break.